Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots of interviews I'm excited about. We've got Zed Jelani on. Of course, he's going to be talking about the Biden administration's decision to drop a lawsuit against Yale University and what the significance of that is. We have an economist on. She's been on with us before, Pavlina Chernova. She's making the case for a federal jobs guarantee. Ayanna Pressley actually just introduced a bill for that in the House, so very timely there. And this one I am extra excited about, New York Assemblyman Ron Kim. He is the lawmaker who says that Andrew Cuomo called him and threatened him and bullied him over his questioning around that nursing home scandal. So we're going to talk directly to him to get the details there. But we wanted to start with some very discouraging developments on the $15 minimum wage.
So everything has been up in the air on the $15 minimum wage. Some people, Senator Sanders, and we'll get to this, and others maintaining that it could be part of a budget reconciliation process, which means it needs to be deficit neutral. The opposite. It has to affect the deficit. And they have pointed to the CBO and different other scoring, as well as EPI, that says that it might be possible. But Biden, and as he previewed, and I think it was a 60 Minutes interview, or it was one of those CBS interviews about 2 weeks ago, he said, I just don't see how it's going to happen, which basically means if you're not going to push for it, it's ultimately dead, even though it's something that you support. This is what he told the governors over the weekend. He privately told the governors in a meeting, minimum wage hike likely isn't going to happen. I mean, in terms of what they're citing in there, he just says, I really want this in there, but it doesn't look like we can do it because of reconciliation. I'm not going to give up, but right now we have to prepare for this, not making it. And it's like I said, Krystal, it is really a matter of political will.
Yes.
If you want to make it happen, you can make it happen. As I said, I actually talk with some friends who were Republicans and worked on some of the Obamacare stuff. They were like, listen, if you want it, it can be done. All you got to do is you got to work the numbers, the parliamentarian. He's like, but there's complicated ways in order to make pretty much anything you want happen through these things. So this fact that he's not going to push for it effectively means it's going to be dead in the COVID relief package.
Yeah, I mean,
it's in there in the House version, but at the end of the day, when the Senate votes, I doubt it'll.
Yeah, it's pretty clear what's going on here. Very standard Democratic sort of tactic, which is that people like Manchin and Sinema and Joe Biden, they don't really have the political will to fight for this thing. So what they actually want is a good excuse for why they can't do it. And they've been trying to use these parliamentarian budget reconciliation rules as their excuse to say, doesn't pass the Byrd rule, which we keep talking about here. That's what Joe Manchin said. Look, if it doesn't go through the Byrd rule, I'm not going to support it. Well, Bernie Sanders has been working overtime to make sure they don't have that excuse. So we can throw A1B up on the screen. He's been talking to lawyers. He's been doing everything he possibly can behind the scenes to make sure it would be allowed through reconciliation. And in fact, that CBO report that came out, that was really kind of the analysis was kind of crappy, to be honest with you. It was it's going to kill this many jobs and it's actually going to add to the deficit, both of which are contradicted by other evidence and studies. But even the fact that it said it would add to the deficit makes it eligible for budget reconciliation. And here's the public case that Bernie is making. We can throw his tweet up on the screen. He says, look, if Republicans can use reconciliation to try to take health care away from 32 million Americans by repealing the ACA, please don't tell me we can't use the same rules to provide a raise to 32 million workers by increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. No more excuses. And he's got a pretty good case to make here, because it wasn't only their attempt to repeal Obamacare through reconciliation, it was also the massive tax cut, corporate tax cut giveaway. They've used the reconciliation process to do massive policy changes. And so since the CBO and other independent analysis say that the minimum wage does in fact affect the budget, it seems like he may have done what it takes to get this past the Senate parliamentarian. At that point, it just makes it clear that Manchin, Biden, and co., they just don't really care to fight for it. Well, I mean, Manchin is actively somewhat opposed, at least a $15 minimum wage. Biden just doesn't really have the will to put pressure on the right-wing senators within the Democratic caucus.
And that's the part that actually baffles me, because, okay, let's say Manchin is ideologically committed to a $15 minimum wage. Why don't you counter with 12? Why don't you try and get a 12 or an 11, whatever he supports, and put that in there? Because we all know 60 votes is not going to happen for a minimum wage hike. And so he's saying, I want to pass this through regular order. Now, apparently, the new line in Washington is we'll do this in reconciliation 2.0, like the next reconciliation. Yeah, okay. I mean, I heard a lot of promises about that. How many times do we hear about the CARES Act 2.0? They're like, don't worry, it's not in this one, and it's in this one. Yeah, and then Americans were left, with absolutely nothing for 9 months. That's essentially, this is it. Like, the first 100 days, he's already been in office for, I think exactly a month. It's been 22 days since he's took the oath. I mean, you've got 80 more. Already, things are beginning to go down. It's going to take at least another month or so until this all passes. So your flagship piece of legislation, that is what people are going to know you for. And he's not making any counteroffers. He's just like, hey, I'll try it later, or regular order, or, anybody who's actually engaged in the political process would be negotiating with Manchin. Like, if the White House wanted to make this happen, they'd go on the Sunday shows and they'd be like, listen, we're open. Like, they're willing to negotiate on stimulus checks. Why aren't they willing to negotiate on this? They're just hiding behind a process argument saying, no, it can't happen. I truly believe this is probably the only shot they ever had at doing it for the next 10 years.
And this relief bill, the $1.9 trillion package that's going through reconciliation, look, it has things in it that are really, really important.
Yeah.
And some things that will somewhat shift the game in terms of moving forward. But mostly we're talking about a Band-Aid. Right. And mostly we're talking about a woefully insufficient Band-Aid at this point. Remember, $1.9 trillion back in November is way different than $1.9 trillion now when people have been struggling and suffering and getting further and further behind all these months. Lifting the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Overtime, again, this wasn't even going to happen right away. And tying it to a metric so that it continues to automatically increase. It does have an automatic stabilizer in this bill. That would have been something that actually somewhat shifted the landscape for tens of millions of Americans. This would make a huge difference. The minimum wage has been $7.25 for so long. I saw a stat. This is the longest that the U.S. has gone without lifting the minimum wage.
2009.
Yes, exactly. Right. So this is way, way, way overdue. I was reminded this weekend of Kshama Sawant, the councilwoman from Seattle, when I talked to her about her efforts there to lift the minimum wage to $15 an hour and what actually worked to get that through. Because back when they were doing it, I mean, this was seen as utopian, ridiculous. It was going to kill all the businesses, et cetera. And she said, look, it wasn't a case we made to lawmakers. It was grassroots pressure and having everybody together, making the case and making it really hot for legislators who were going to go against this. And I saw some inklings of this or some movement in this direction with the Poor People's Campaign is organizing West Virginians to make the case about how this would better their lives to try to put pressure on Senator Joe Manchin. Let's take a listen to some of the testimonial of local West Virginians and what $15 minimum wage would mean for them.
I'm here in Fayette County, West Virginia. I've been a service worker for over 13 years. I've done just about everything in the restaurant industry. I also am a raft guide during the season. When COVID hit, we were only they don't take in the fact that I make a sub-minimum wage of $2 an hour, so they don't take in my tips for my unemployment. I was only getting $67 a week, and that ran out in August. And I lost my house. I had to move in with my grandmother. And even though I have gone back to work as a bartender, we're not getting the same amount of tips. It's 50 to 75% less. And that sub-minimum wage isn't making up for that. If it was $15 an hour, I could afford to live on my own. I could afford to buy a car that's not 25 years old. We just really need help here.
And, those are the voices that are completely absent and invisible in this town. They're completely invisible to all this debate that just gets caught up in the process and political gamesmanship. This is the real world impact. Poor People's Campaign is doing another West Virginia event today. Look, it's incredibly uphill. The battle that they and everybody else are fighting at this point, especially since Joe Biden just kind of threw in the towel. But over time, this is the only thing that can actually work is to make lawmakers pay for not doing what they should be for their own people.
Yeah, and it's like you just said. How many people on TV are making the case that the stimulus checks are too high and they're going to too many rich people? And how many people do you hear like that who are like, hey, I actually really need this. Yeah. If you don't pass this, it will have a massive impact on my life. Yeah, that's what's wrong with Washington.
That's it. All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.